today I want to talk about, there's always a lot of controversy over the Russian capture K98 Mausers, and I just want to give my opinion on it and share my insight on what I think about the gun in general, and if it's worth collecting, good or bad, so forth and so on. A brief history on the Russian captures is a lot of misconception on how they were captured. A lot of people think they're just picked up off the battlefield, and for the most part, that's really not the case. Most of these were carried to the very end of the war, and at the end of the war, basically they had to surrender all their weapons, and you might have seen the pictures where there's literally mountains of these in piles, just stacked like firewood, basically. And so the Russians, being communists and not able to really produce much of their own stuff, and because of inefficiency and whatnot, they decided, okay, we'll keep all these. So they loaded them, basically threw them in the train cars, just stacked them like firewood in there, and just threw them in a big pile and hauled them all back to the motherland. And from there, there was no way to know the condition of each gun, and they figured it would be too time-consuming. They wanted to rework them, but they figured it was too time-consuming to go through each rifle individually. So what they did was they fully dismantled every rifle down to just a barreled receiver, and they threw each light component in basically into barrels, into each, like a bolt here, a stock here, and they would look through each individual component and throw away the bad pieces and keep the good pieces. If they had a good barreled action, they would then reconstruct a Mauser based on just whatever parts they had laying around. They kept all the good parts, scrapped all the bad. And with the German tolerancing being as tight as it was, every part would interchange, everything would headspace, everything was fine. And so what you end up with is a total mixed master gun. The only thing that will be matching is the barrel and the receiver. The German Mausers were built extremely well. They were built too well for the war they were fighting. They were fighting a war of attrition, and they really just needed to make more stamping style guns like the STG-44. And of course, in 1945, basically H&K was creating a STG-45, essentially, which had a delayed blowback system with no gas system. I mean, it was just crazy simple, and that's really what they needed to be making to be more effective in the war, because they actually spent a lot of time making a gun that would last 100 years when they only had a few years left to be around. These get a lot of criticism because they're completely non-matching, and they have no history, blah, 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 whatever. I totally disagree with that. I'll go over many reasons why, but these guns served till the very end of the war, and the guy that was holding this barreled action or any of these pieces was most likely killed or marched off to a gulag where he was, worked to death. I mean, these K98s, the Russian captures, were carried to the very end of the war, to the bitter end. So a numbers matching gun, truly all numbers matching, is more valuable because it's more rare and more collectible because of the rarity. But generally speaking, they have much less history because, the first time they get into a conflict with an American or whatever, they get dropped, and there it is laying in the snow, and, it wasn't carried to the end. It most likely, unfortunately, guy got killed, and there his gun was, and some guy duffel cut it and hauled it back home. And now you get, these outrageously priced numbers matching K98s that probably haven't seen a whole lot of combat, but they're, they're all original and more rare, therefore more valuable. My argument is the K98 has much more, or the Russian capture K98 has much more history. It's seen a lot more things. And these were reworked and put into crates. So, during the Cold War era, because in the event of an invasion, they could arm the population with these and the Mosin guns that they reworked. They basically saved everything and stored caches of stuff all over the countryside where they could literally, at a moment's notice, basically start pulling this stuff out and start, arming everyone. Where basically it'd be like America, where there's a gun behind every blade of grass. So I can't stand when people bash these things and say they're non-numbers matching, therefore they're junk. But in the same breath, they will defend a USGI M1 carbine that basically has no matching anything, because not only were they not numbered, but they were reworked a million times, where most times you're lucky if the barrel matches the receiver, or there's no numbers matching, but be correct. And a lot of times this stuff has been changed. Same thing with the M1 Garand. It's like, completely non-correct, non-matching, but it doesn't matter because it's a U.S. rifle. And everybody will look the other way and never mention it, never complain, and just love these rifles up and down. Like, 'cause look, it's American wood and steel, so that's all that matters. The receiver is World War II dated. That's all that matters. Same thing with this. This thing's been all over. It's not correct. It's got a round bolt. It's got a bayonet lug. This thing's basically as non-correct as it can get, essentially, but yet it's got a World War II dated receiver. So that's all that matters, apparently. So, yeah. That's one of my biggest gripes is, American rifles get a pass, but the German K98s do not. And you can find good examples of Russian captures. A lot of times on these Russian captures, see if I can get it to show up. This doesn't have, this has got the older style Waffenumps on it than, some of the newer rifle, or, it doesn't have the swastika, it's just got the eagle on it, because this is a second year, this is 1936, so this is a second year K98, second year it was made. So, this rifle, for me, is got a lot of history because it served 9 years with the Third Reich and was turned in at the end of the war. And this, of all K98s, this one's got some history. This one, the guy I bought it off of had done, kind of refinished the stock and took the Russian paint off. And the only K98s that I buy, Russian capture-wise, are the ones that do not have, a lot of times they'll have a big X. I don't buy the ones with the X, and I don't buy the ones that the Waffenumps have been removed. In my opinion, you're never going to have trouble selling a K98 if the Waffenumps are intact. A lot of times they just took a punch or a grinder and ground them off. And if they're intact, that's what people look for. At a gun show, the only ones you're going to see not sell are the ones with the Waffenumps removed. And these are an amazing gun. They're great shooters. If you didn't, just shooting and holding it wise, you wouldn't know that it was a total mix master because of the German tolerancing. This one technically has got the correct stock, even though it's not numbers matching, because the later ones had a cupped butt plate, and they also had a groove up here for a sight hood. This one, was an older style. So I have a bunch of these. I've sold 2 K98s in my life, and I regret both of them. I wish I would have kept them. These things are super collectible. Up until, even 5 years ago, you could get these in the $300 to $350 range all the time, everywhere. Now, pretty much there's none being imported. It's been long enough since they've been imported that the prices are now, just in the last, 300 to 350 5 years ago, now they're 700 to 800 at gun shows, which is astronomical. And that's what happens when you can no longer just go anywhere and buy them. When everybody that has them doesn't want to get rid of them, the prices go through the roof because the availability is very, very limited. you know, I would never sell this for what I paid because it's worth more to me than what I paid. I exchanged, you know, I think $350 for this, and at the time it was worth $350 to me. That's why I exchanged that much money for it. And to get me to sell it, it would take more than that because I don't want to sell it. And that's kind of people's attitude is, I just don't want to sell it. I'd rather have it than the money. And so to get people like me to separate myself from this rifle, it takes a pile of money. And that's just how it is. That's just how economics works, supply and demand. But I recommend, you know, getting these. Like I said, they're not as collectible as a numbers matching one, but let's say the Russians only took 10,000 of these and reworked them for some special purpose. These would be worth more because of the rarity. These aren't as rare, therefore they're cheaper, but they aren't junk. Technically, this one is more correct than this M1 Garand, but nobody cares that this isn't correct because it is the gun that it is. But this one has more original parts to itself than that one, but that one gets a pass, this one does not. So you kind of get what I'm saying here. It's kind of like a double standard. Just because the Germans happen to number everything, and the American guns really just maker marked it. They didn't care about numbers matching. You know, numbers matching is more like a European thing where they numbered stuff. It's not really an American thing. We didn't really care. So it is what it is, guys, and this is my opinion on the Russian capture K98 Mausers.